Okay, guys, if you're anything like me, you kind of want to know the rules pretty well before you tackle a game. And I would say that's definitely true of Solomon Kane. We're obviously expecting some gameplay videos coming very soon, and our delivery of the game really in the next month. So I just wanted to go through the rules. I'm going to use the rules that were released in an update a few months back. So these might not be the final rules, just to point out, but I believe they are. I'm just going to talk about the basic rules and how you play the game, and then hopefully, after watching this, you can kind of crack on with Solomon Kane when you do get your copy. So, first of all, it's about the game modes. So with the game modes, you've got four different game modes. You've got the standard, the way it was designed to be played, I guess you can call it, which is co-op, which is 1 to 4 players, each player taking a virtue, and not the others. Now with this, what's really important to know, if you're playing with less than 4 players, so therefore you're not using all of the virtues, you just keep the dashboards of the unplayed virtues nearby, because you will be able to use their actions and the virtues themselves. You can ignore their virtue deck, and I'll talk about the virtue deck in a second. But co-op's the usual way it's played. Confrontation is when you add in darkness, so one player plays darkness, and then plays against the other 4 players, or up to 4 players, because you can tie in the same rules as co-op. Solo is using Providence, where you use the Providence virtue, which is an ultra powerful virtue, and then you can still use the other virtues kind of abilities, as it were, because it's all tied into Providence play. Okay, and then Duel is when you play Providence against Darkness. So it's a 2-player mode, good against evil. I'm going to move on from this. When you set up, the only thing when you're setting it up is this is quite nice to show you. So you're going to have your virtue boards as your player boards around. Make sure you've got your virtue deck, which includes, so for example, Temperance has got a Temperance deck, and these are all your action cards, if you like. Make sure you've got your Darkness deck handy, and Event deck. Now these are generic, Darkness and Event, so you will use the same cards for the Darkness and the Event deck for each scenario. The difference is you'll use different numbers of these Darkness cards as you go through, which I'll talk about in the setup of certain scenes. Now it depends on which scenario you're on. So when you go to the storybook, you'll either have a scene or a story. Now, I'm just going to skip through all of this. If it's a scene, then this is where you've got like tiles, miniatures, and things like that, and it'll tell you how many darkness cards to use. So this is quite good to use. So this is a scene chapter, okay, as an example. It'll tell you the number of darkness cards, and your darkness cards are your timer. You're going to trigger a darkness card at the end of each player's turn, and then there also is your timer. You can also change this deck. You can add cards to that darkness deck. So make sure you've got your whole deck of darkness cards handy as a supply pool. It'll also tell you about any initial discovery cards that you need to reveal and use at the start of that game, and obviously have your discovery card deck ready for when you're doing that chapter. There'll be any keywords or stats which are different to just the standard game, which you'll need to read up. Of course, the objectives. Why are you doing this? What are you intending to meet in this objective? And then the outcome. What is the outcome after you've finished? And it will tell you where to go for certain chapters. So you might go to a different chapter depending on how you resolved that particular scene. That particular chapter. Now, there's so much information that's stored on the discovery cards as well. So if there's anything that's written on the cards itself, that supersedes anything written in the rule book or the chapter book. Okay, and that's an important note to make. Now, if you're not doing a scene, you might be doing a story chapter. Now, Story Chapter doesn't use tiles and tokens. Instead, it still uses a Darkness deck, it still uses Discovery cards, and it still uses, of course, your board, your player board, okay, which has got your 4 different stats, which I'll talk about in a bit. So you've got strength, courage, and compassion with danger as well. Now, this will give you the starting kind of stats, and then they're kind of persistent around across the whole act, as it were. You've got, again, special rules, keywords, whatever it might be, maybe actions, and then you've got objectives, and it could be the Solomon's track, for example, this one, where you're trying to put light tokens onto here, and depending on how many light tokens you can do before you finish this particular chapter will determine what the next chapter is. And it's about, in this particular the choice as it is, in this particular chapter, for example, you could be on the bright side or the dark side, okay? Bright or dark path for Solomon Kane. Effectively, 1 or 2 light tokens placed on, 0, 1 or 2, sorry, I should say, is classed as a dark path, whereas 3 plus is counted as a bright path. And there's also things that will happen from that, which is new to the game, which hasn't been shown before. You then trigger an outcome with this symbol, okay? So whatever that outcome is, and that's when it ends, or you run out of time. So if you've got the last darkness card, you can resolve it completely for that darkness or play a turn, and then resolve the end of the chapter. Obviously, if at any point your strength, clarity, or compassion goes below 1, so off the track if you like, or if your danger exceeds 10, your act, the whole act, ends immediately. You go to the end of the book, and then you read what the end of the act, I should say, and then you read what the outcome is. Okay, so in terms of failure. So card-wise, you got your virtue cards. So you got your virtue dashboard, and you got your virtue cards, which form your virtue deck. Now, these have you got 3 permanent actions on your dashboard, okay, and then you've got your 2 at any given time. You'll have 2 virtue cards, your left and right hand, they call it. Okay, you'll need a discard pile, which is what you're going to use when you use the actions on the virtue card, or when you voluntarily at the end of your turn decide to discard these cards as well. Okay, if at any point you run out of a draw deck of virtue cards, you shuffle your discard to make a new virtue deck. You have darkness cards. As I said, when you're setting up the scenario, it'll tell you a number of darkness cards to use as your timer, effectively. And on these cards, it depends on, are you doing a story chapter or are you doing a scene chapter? If you're doing a story chapter, when you resolve a darkness card, you just do the top section, which has got the little storybook icon. If you're doing a scene, you start from the second part, which is if they are near, or I think they call it surroundings, Kane's surroundings, which means adjacent. Then you do all of the things from top to bottom, if you're able to do so. And then you do, if they're further away, so if they are not adjacent, you do this section. So you resolve this, you resolve all cards, to be honest, from top to bottom. Okay. Each miniature will act once. So if, for example, if I can zoom in with this, I think I can. So you can see here it says 1 hunter moves 2 and fights for 3. And this is a test. Then it says 3 hunters move 2 and fight. If you've moved 1 miniature, one of the hunters, and done this, you do not move them again as one of the 3 hunters and then fight again. Okay, so they only activate once. So that's an important point to make. Okay, as I said, some of your actions, some of your virtue cards will allow you to put darkness cards onto the deck, and that's just extending the game. Okay, it's like adding a timer to it. Then the final section is a spawn, so you're going to spawn a shadow onto X as long as you haven't met the limit of shadows, which is linked directly to your danger track, which I'll show you in a bit. There are nightmare cards, so inside of the darkness cards there are nightmare cards, which are like very, very strong and dangerous cards when you do draw them. Okay, Again, just do the exact same. So if it's story, you do just the top section. If it's a scene section, you do the bottom section. Just note that sometimes they've got kind of like up to 3 shadows can spawn at any one card, which is very, very strong. Then you've got event cards. Now, event cards are used for 2 different reasons. Effectively, if a shadow enters the same space as Solomon Kane, you draw an event card. And then you resolve it top to bottom, reading exactly as it says. The other use, which is probably used more, is the 3 numbers at the bottom. These are for when you ever do a test, fight, a talk, or an explore. These are the 3 different tests you can do in the game. And the numbers are used for depending on which miniature or which character is doing the test. If it is Solomon Kane, you use the far right number, and that goes from anything from 1 to 7. If you are dealing with your ally, which is classed as a crowd, it will say it in the storybook, in the chapter book, whether it's crowd and what classes is crowd, and also rabble. So if it's crowds for allies or enemies is a rabble, you use this first number. If it's a champion as an ally or a villain, which are probably most of your enemies, then you use the middle section. If it's a nemesis, as your enemy, you use the far right hand number. Okay, so it goes. The range of numbers goes up by 1 as you go from left to right, but obviously you can still get a 1 on any of them, because that is the random nature of the event deck and these test numbers. There are also fight cards in the game, which will have. Let me zoom in a bit. And these will be specific to different fights in the game, and you'll be instructed to show what these cards are. Obviously, they'll have a number on them, and then it's linked to a test. So when you do a fight action, it'll be a fight, and then in brackets will have a number, and then you have modifiers that will go on top of that, and then you draw a card and you add that random number to it, and then determine it on the result of that test will determine what happens. And it gives you a bit of description about what's actually happening, and then it tells you to draw the effect of that fight. So there's a fight effect cards as well. Let's zoom out, which are these, and you can see it's the E number, which is denoted from whatever the fight card tells you to. And then you read those top to bottom and resolve them. Some of these things will stay in play, some of them will not, and it will tell you at the bottom of the card whether it does. Now, discovery cards, the main bulk of this game. Okay, this is really the key part. This is where a lot of the story is going to be told, where a lot of your options and your choices are going to be made. And there's 3 different types which are denoted with a symbol at the bottom of the card. There's instants, ongoing, or opportunities. Instants, just trigger once, and then you just do what it says on there. If for whatever reason you draw a discovery with an instant effect for the second time, you don't trigger it again. Ongoing effects basically will just carry on until that card is discarded for one reason or another, and it'll tell you on the card how that happens. And then opportunities are like new actions and these will tend to have like dice slots that you can put dice on, or specific different things which will all be explained on the card again. But just be aware that it's like new actions is the best way to think of it. Okay, you've now got, which are new to the game, you've got sin cards, okay, with the 7 sins, the 7 deadly sins, and it'll tell you what the game effect of that is while the sin is in play, and then to get rid of the sin, you need to place light onto the bottom section. Once it's been placed, you discard it to the supply, and then that game effect does no longer take place. It'll tell you when that sin comes aboard, and I believe it'll be during the event cards, so just to point out, but it could be through discovery cards, story, whatever it might be. There's also omen cards. They don't say anything on these, but just read the special rules section of the chapter in the book to read what the omen does. Now, you're going to be rolling dice to do action in this game, and on each die, 6-sided die, you've got 2 faith symbols, and just note that the faith symbol can be used as a wild dice, so as any of these different symbols, but you can only use 1. You can only use 1, okay, on your turn as a wild. Then you've got bravery, and on the flip side of that bravery is fear. and then you've got determination on the final sides, which flips over to pain. So you've got these 5 different symbols, which will relate to the actions on your virtue cards and your virtue dashboard. You have to match the same ones, but as it says here, you could use a wild and a bravery, a wild and a pain, or a bravery and a pain. So either combination of those will do it, and then you do what the action tells you to do after you've allocated all of your dice. That's important. So you allocate all your dice first, and I'll talk about this when we come to a turn order. Light's really, really important in this game. Obviously, Solomon Kane, the Puritan, is that light against the darkness, is against that evil. He's the good against the evil. So a lot of the mechanics in the game will be using light tokens and placing light tokens. As I showed you with one of those story chapters, you've got Solomon's Path, and as I said before, you'll go 2 different routes depending on how you do in that particular chapter. So if you manage to get if you don't manage to get 3 or more light on the path, it's therefore classed as a dark path. If you manage to get 3 or 4 or 5 on here, then it's classed as a bright path. In addition to this, whenever you do a path, you get a modification on your tracks, a permanent modification on your tracks for this act. So if you manage to get 3 light tokens on a path, then you get 1 modification, which can be either to move danger down or move up strength, clarity, or compassion. If you get 4, you get 2 modifications, and if you get 5, you can get 3 modifications, and you can mix and match those up with the different abilities. Okay. The dashboard I've already mentioned about the 3 actions. So you've got the 3 core actions here. You've also got a space for your miniature, and if you place, which is always the right hand permanent action, using 3 dice of any kind, you can place your virtue onto the board. Now, once you place it onto the board, the bonus it gives is written on here where it was placed. So temperance would be explore +1. So if you're in the vicinity or in the aura of temperance, which means adjacent to, or in the same area as temperance, Solomon Kane, for all of his tests, will get an explore +1, for example. You can also always do an investigation or an inspection action. You've also got 2 slots for donated dice and 2 slots for reserved dice. As well, there's a reminder that you're able to flip or re-roll 1 dice after you've done your initial roll of the 3 dice on your turn. You're able to do that for free once. Okay, so that's the idea of a player board. Okay. Next, you've got the stat board that is communal, and I'm going to talk about the communal things now. So the stat board, strength, clarity, and compassion, and danger, will give you bonuses. So if you can see on here, as you go up from 7, 8, 9, and 10, you're going to add bonuses to any strength action, which is fight action. Then when you do explore action, your clarity is used, and it can have positive or negative modifications to that depending on where you are on this track. And then compassion, of course, for talking, and then again, positive or negative attributes to that. Danger also gives negative and positive contributions to tests, but also it tells you what the maximum number of shadows can be on the board. With a danger of 1, it's a maximum of 1 shadow on the board. 2, 3, 4, 2. 5, 6, 7, 3 shadows may be on the board. 8, 9, 10, 4 shadows. Obviously, if you go off 10, you have lost that act. Now, a few other important additions in this new rule set, or in the most recent rule set, as it were, is you've got the cloud, and this is an area to put your communal resources. Things like mercy cubes, luck cubes, blessing tokens, and purity. So, luck. What is luck? When you draw your cards to get random numbers from the event deck, whenever you're doing tests, you can spend a luck cube to draw another event card to get a different number. You can do that as many times as you want as you've got luck cubes. Now, these are not removed from the art cloud at the end of the chapter. So they are persistent. That means that they will stay on there. So if you don't use up your luck in a particular chapter, you will have it for the next chapter, and so forth. Mercy cubes. When you want to do a allocate dice to certain areas, you can use mercy cubes as additional wild dice. Okay, so this is in addition to your 1 wild dice that you're allowed to use on your turn from the actual dice. So you can use those mercy. Please note that the mercy cubes are also not removed from the cloud at the end of the chapter, so they are also persistent, which is really, really important as well. So really, really useful if you need that extra die result to complete an action. Okay, blessings are a one-use resource. So these are sorry, I should have said these are all one-use resources. So once you've used it, you take it away and you put it into the supply. Now they've got what they do on the actual cards themselves, on the blessing cards themselves. Okay, and they're really powerful one-time use at any point during the game. So in another player's turn, you can use it, whatever it does to help you with that. It tells you what it does on the back on the actual token itself. And then you have purity points, which are used in some of the chapters to track how your virtues are doing. You basically start to put these onto your cloud, as it were, and then that will total up to give you a result which you resolve on the chapter book. They are removed from the cloud at the end of each chapter. Okay, so they are not persistent. The maps themselves, the map tiles, they denote the scene and move your miniatures around. You've got the white lines, the single white lines, which are just distinguishing between areas. If you see a red line, you are not allowed to cross it, any miniature. That includes the immortals as well as the mortals. So we're talking about virtues and shadows. No one can to cross that. Double lines are specific to a discovery card. It will tell you exactly what that double line means. Okay, so it could be a trigger or whatever it might be. And then you've finally got doors, which can determine a line on the edge of a tile. Okay, so doors, obviously, you can go between different sections of that map tile. So you can see here 2 map tiles put together with a door. So then you'd have to go through that door to get from one area to the other. That's all I wanted to do. So the move action, unless it states otherwise, move is always for Solomon Kane. Unless it says like move Hunter 2. And you move adjacent squares as long as you don't go through red lines. So you make sure you go through the white lines. Then that's absolutely fine. And you can move up to whatever that move value is worth. Okay. Tests. So obviously, how do you progress the story? How do you do things? You do tests. It can be, as I said, either fight, talk, or explore. And the different virtues help boost those 3 things. Now, if we take talk, for example, here is one of the ones that might be read on a card that says talk, and it says up to 5 discovery card 72, 6 to 7 discovery card 61. 8 plus discovery card 89. So what you would do is you resolve a test, and I'll talk about that next. So what you do is you add your current modifier. So if you're in the case of a fight, you add your strength modifier. So remember where you are on the strength track determines if it's a positive, negative, or 0 modifier. You add your base value to that. Okay, so the base value will be listed on the action which triggered the test. So it might say, for example, Virtue plays a card that says fight 5. Fight is 5 is the base number. So you got 5. Then you add your strength modifier, or take it away, depending on what it is. Then -1 for every shadow in Solomon Kane's surroundings. In other words, adjacent to Solomon Kane. We call it threatening Solomon Kane. Then if you're you get +2 if you're in the aura of courage. So courage is the virtue that helps with fight. Okay. And you get +2 if he's within that. If it's an enemy miniature taking the test, there's +1 for every enemy mortal in the target surrounding. That means not shadows. And then +1 for every shadow in Solomon Kane's surroundings. So you're looking at the mortals' surroundings and then Solomon Kane's surroundings. To do the talk, it's very similar, except for you use the different things. So it's compassion modifier, it's still the base, whatever's on the card. -1 again from shadows that are adjacent to Solomon Kane. +2 if Justice is giving her aura to Solomon Kane. And then finally for explore action, base, then plus or minus the clarity modifier, -1 again for any shadows adjacent, +2 if temperance is in the aura. And the aura is adjacent, okay? So as long as your virtue is either in the same space as Solomon Kane or surrounding Solomon Kane, then that is able. Now, just a point to make, on each little square or area of the map, you can place, the maximum number of miniatures you can place is linked to their size. So that's a really important point. So it's talking about it here. So as long as at least half of the base is in that area, then it's fine. But as soon as that's all full, no other mortals can move into that space. Obviously, a shadow is immortal, so it can go into that space. And as soon as a shadow enters into the same area as Solomon Kane, you discard the shadow, you take it away, you take it from the board, and you resolve an event card. Okay, very, very important. So, so this is the modifiers. These are the modifiers, and then the last thing you do after you've done the modifiers is you draw an event card and you add the random number to your test. That is therefore your test value, and then you compare it to what discovery card outcome you draw. Okay, and in case of fight cards, it showed you which fight event takes place because of that result. So what do you do on your turn? Trigger any start of turn effects. Roll 3 dice. You always roll 3 dice. Then all virtues and all players can choose to either flip 1 dice to its opposite place, or re-roll 1 of those die. Any die you had on your dashboard in the donated or reserved areas are therefore taken off those and then placed into your dice pool. So you could have up to 7 dice on your turn to play with. Obviously, whatever the donated or reserved areas, they're not rolled again. They keep the dice face that was donated or reserved when they were placed into those slots. Then you allocate your dice to do actions, and you need to allocate them all first before you actually perform all the actions. Okay, so your options are, on your dashboard you've got the 3 permanent actions. You can place your dice onto those. You can place it onto either your left or right hand, which are your 2 virtue cards that you've got active. You can place it, and this is new, you can place it onto the center permanent action of any other virtue, but it will cost you an additional dice of any value. Or you can place it onto a discovery card if able to kind of resolve that. So they are the different options you have. You can also, of course, put 1 dice into your reserved slot of your dashboard, and you can place 1 dice onto one of the other virtues' donated dice spaces. Now there are 2 spaces for each of those on each dashboard. If it's full, if one of your fellow virtue boards already have 2 dice donated, you can still donate a dice to it, but that virtue player has to decide which one to remove to replace with the new dice, and then the other one's just sent to the pool that you have. Oh, okay. What just happened? Okay, moving on. After that, after you've done all your actions, you then, if you use one of your left or right virtue cards as an action, you therefore discard it. Okay, you therefore have to discard it to your discard pile. Then, once you've done all of your actions, you make a choice of whether to keep those 2 virtue cards there or discard any number of them, either one of them. Then, once you've done that, any blank space on your left or right hand is replaced from the top of your virtue cards and put back onto that space. Please be aware you will draw back up to a hand of 2 virtue cards every turn. Okay, so you're going to have 2 in your hand that you can effectively play with for those right and left hands. Okay. Finally, discard any dice that are not placed on reserved or donated slots, and they go back into the pool of dice. Trigger any end of turn effects. Flip your token over, your player token, because you're going to determine I'll talk about that at the start of the round, but you're going to determine player order at the start of a round, and once it's finished your turn, you flip over your player token to show that you've actually been. Then darkness takes a turn. Now, normally, in the normal game, this means draw a darkness card and resolve it top to bottom. If there is an omen card on the top of the darkness deck, you must resolve the omen. Again, the details of what that does, it will be in the chapter book that you are doing. You draw the top card from the darkness deck, and if it's a story, remember, if it's a story chapter, you just resolve this top section. If it's a scene chapter, you resolve the other sections, as I've mentioned before. Once you finish that, it moves on to the next player and the next virtue until you finish the round. Now, a little bit about shadows, okay, and your virtues. So shadows will move according to the darkness card. That's when they mostly move, and spawn on the darkness card. Please make sure you look at the danger track to determine the maximum number of shadows that can be on the board at any one time. That is very, very important. If at any point a shadow occupies the same space as Solomon Kane, it is removed and an event card is triggered, top to bottom. Okay? You can voluntarily move Solomon Kane into an area with a shadow. You still will remove the shadow and you will trigger an event card, but you can continue Solomon Kane movement afterwards, after you've resolved the event card. In terms of your virtues, what they can do is pretty cool. Whenever a shadow moves into an area that contains a virtue, not Solomon Kane, a virtue, then you produce what's called a virtue shockwave. What that means is the virtue is removed from the board, the shadow in the same area, and anything adjacent to that area, any shadows adjacent to that area, are removed from the board. Okay, so we're talking about the virtue's aura. Okay, and in the standard game, that means adjacent. Now, if you're playing solo with Providence, you can actually increase her aura, okay, in the game, making it 2 spaces away. But if a shadow enters the same area as a virtue, you have a choice. You can allow it to move in and therefore trigger one of these shockwaves, or you can call it hold their ground. The shadow cannot move into the area, return it to the last area it was before it moved, and then your danger increases by 1. Just be aware that can cause really bad problems. And that's effectively it. At the start of a round, you will determine amongst yourselves who will be first, second, third, and fourth player with a token, and then that cannot be changed unless a card says otherwise. Talking about the different modes, you've got the Providence for solo mode, and you can see that her board's slightly different, especially with these 3 light token spaces, slots if you like, where you can increase her aura size. So instead of just being adjacent to Solomon Kane, it can be up to 2 spaces away. You can put it on here to get an extra dice, so rolling 4 dice instead of 3 at the start of your turn. Or you can put it on here to get plus X to all test, which is the number of these aura spaces, these light spaces that have been taken up. So up to 3 plus X on all tests. She's got her 3 standard actions. She's got up to 3 that she can reserve. She's still got the standard, and you still can put 1 left and right hand cards on her virtual board. Okay, and then darkness is another mode. I'm not going to go into that into detail because to be honest, I've not read up on it. But effectively, a player takes the role of darkness and can make it harder for the players. Is my understanding of that. Okay, and then you've got at the back of the rulebook, you'll have a reference about all the key words, what they mean. But that is the general rules of how to play Solomon Kane. The things to really just make note of is a lot of the information about narrative, about gameplay, and about actions will be on the cards. So you don't have to worry about reading the rulebook for those. Okay. Also, remember the chapter pages in the storybook will tell you about the different actions you can do and the objectives and everything. You'll have your player board, remember, which will have your 3 permanent actions that are available to you at all times, and then a left and right hand action that you will choose from your hand of virtue cards that you always ever have 2 in your hand. you'll be able to bring your virtue onto the board using the rightmost action. You take your miniature off the slot that it's kept on, put them onto the board. They grant bonuses, remember, for tests, and they also can ward off shadows. And you will get the bonus that says on the actual thing itself. You make sure that you decide on a turn order at the start of the round. And remember, you are going to draw a darkness card at the end of each player's turn. Okay, that's really important. Not once all 4 players have gone. It's at the end of each player's turn. Okay, remember your darkness deck is your timer for the scenario. So for that chapter, so make sure you keep an eye on that. And movement, no miniature can move past red borders. Okay, only through white borders. Keep an eye out for the double white borders, which are chapter-specific rules. And your 3 tests are what you're going to do for the game, of course. And remember, you've got fight, you got explore, and you've got talk. And just remember to add or take away all modifiers. Okay, and that's about it. I don't know about you, but I cannot wait to get this game up. I think I know watching this video, hopefully you'll get a really good idea about how to play the game, which means that you can go straight into the storybook, set it all up, read the discovery cards, read the chapter, set up the boards, or if it's in the case of a story, read the narrative, and get immersed into the game. What you really don't want to be doing is checking up on the rulebook every 5 seconds. That will take the immersion away. So just make sure you understand the things I've talked about in this video, and hopefully that will give you a really good head start for when the game comes. Okay, guys, as always, thanks for listening. In this case, watching, I suppose, a little bit on the rulebook. Just a little disclaimer again. This is the rulebook copy that was given in an update on Kickstarter, so this may not be the final rulebook, just to point out, but it should be very, very close to it. Okay, thanks very much, guys. Until next time, keep gaming.